Hello guys, my name is Imran Sheikh. I am from YP, and today we are going to be talking about IT shouldn't be a cost center with Mesos. So a little bit about me. I am the lead as well as the architect at Yellow Pages, and I am leading the containers and the Mesos initiative at YP. And my team basically manages thousands of servers infrastructure in multiple data centers at YP. And I basically presented about Mesos containers at various conferences, Usenix, MesosCon earlier this year, as well as last year, Scale, and various other company forums. So here is the brief agenda. So this is what we are going to be talking about today. It basically tells you what is like why ops is a cost center and some of the common problems. What are some of the why DevOps is a solution, and how DevOps looks in practice, like with Mesos, and how does Mesos solve these problems that we have been encountering in Ops world, and how can you benefit? What is your take home from this, and what is the future ahead? So I will basically have 10 minutes left at the end for Q&A. So feel free to ask me any questions. Okay, so let's start. Why Ops is a cost center? It doesn't produce any direct profit for the company. It basically incurs the cost. For example, if you have an operations organization, it doesn't produce anything. It's just like so that's why it's a cost center, right? So but the thing is that if you scale up or down your ops, it has a detrimental effect on the entire profit margin of your company. Typically, cost centers are given autonomy. They are basically run by VPs or like CIOs or whatnot, and they have the responsibility to manage the performance, keeping it under budget. They account for expenditures. So that's what basically happens. And over the period of time, the entire ops org is streamlined. The process is basically improved, and maybe you can get to like lean ops org basically, thereby reducing the overall cost. And again, all the C-suite bosses are basically happy to run the fat checks, and that's why I would say like it's a cost center, right? And at the end, since if the company has multiple like cost centers, they determine which one basically grows, which one shrinks, and which one gets slashed. So that's what they do, right? This is basically happening across the spectrum, across all the companies. So why it is hard to change? The mindset of the ops org is basically to keep the lights on. 70 to 80% of the budget that has been allocated to the org is spent on maintaining the existing infrastructure or applications. That gives very little room to pursue like new directions for the ops org. That's basically, and then when you talk about all the new things, it doesn't make it easy. So since it cannot be changed and there is a constant urge to change, so what people do is that they actually move their on-premise stuff to cloud, they outsource some of the ops work, or they think they made maintenance costs more predictable and easier to measure and manage. So that's the reason why they do it. Argument is by doing that by this guy from Heiner, I quoted him. So if they do that, if they outsource to like some cloud or whatnot, they can focus on exploring more vendors, they can negotiate good price, they can work on upgrading new software, or they can look for new solutions, they can save company money, leave for competitors and whatnot basically. So that's their motivation. But I have a genuine problem with this mindset, because like I myself don't come from that particular background, right? Because personally, if you talk about me, I don't consider myself as a burden. I consider myself as providing value to you. I want to serve you, and I want to improve your product. If I cannot replace you, I want to at least augment you. So if I can live by that motto, why don't the company that I basically work, the org that I basically work in, can't do the same? It's a very difficult problem. But if you have the right person and if you have the right motivation in place, you can achieve whatever you want. So let's talk about what are some of the common ops problem. I will not give you like some boring charts or whatnot. This is just like to make it more interactive so that you can understand it better. So the first thing that we basically face is like static provisioning of resources. So to understand this thing, I will tell you a story. In a story, there's a hero and there's a villain. Let's consider your app or your product is a hero, and the footprint or the infrastructure that it needs to run is a villain, right? So initially, like, your villain is kind of small. You basically have a product, and you basically you buy some gear, and then you basically install some stuff on them, and then you rack them in the data center. It basically works. But what actually happens over the period of time? As your product grows, your villain also grows. You basically add more gear to that. You basically beef it up. You scale it vertically, right? And then if your product becomes mature enough, you have grown your villain so much that it becomes invincible. And if you have more product in the company, or your villain, basically you have multiple villains. For example, you need the similar infrastructure for them as well. And by the time you realize, you will be running this many villains in your org, and your ops will be basically managing them. So what do? You have this many villains. You have many. So you hire guys like me to basically manage them, to tame them, or to basically. So we are sort of like the ringmasters. So that is actually the problem: the static provisioning of your resources. But that's not the only problem. The second I'm talking about is the static provisioning of people as well. Consider this thing. For example, you are running a full-blown shop, and then you basically, your infrastructure footprint is like very extremely big, and then now you have a dedicated team to basically manage various part of the infrastructure. You have sysadmins, you have DBAs, you have network engineers, you have SREs, you have other multiple people managing them. And then if you and the thing is that if you basically add more villains to it, you need more people to manage them. So basically what you are technically doing is that you are statically provisioning your people as well, right? But you are a good person. You don't feel good that, I mean, like, I shouldn't be basically adding more and more people to basically to tame these villains. So what do? You hire a tools guy to basically automate some of the work that these guys are doing, so that like you don't have to do all the repeated tasks, and this DevOps or tools guy can basically automate the job for you. That's the problem, right? Static provisioning of the resources, people, and there's a wasted capacity as well. So when you run your apps on a dedicated host or instance or whatnot, approximately we did a profiling. You only utilize 20% of your resources get used basically, your CPU, your memory. The other thing, everything goes to waste. Even though you have beefed up your thing, you are not basically utilizing everything properly. As I said, the reason being there is no good isolation techniques to run multiple apps on a single host. And again, to make multi-tenant apps behave on the same node is a difficult challenge. It's a evolving, and that's what all of us are basically after, right? How do we run multiple apps on a single machine through containers or whatnot? So, but this is the existing problem. So, and again, that brings me to the fourth problem, the maintenance window. Maintenance for any infrastructure in the current setup requires a week of planning. A thorough launch plan is designed. All the stakeholders are basically crammed up in the war room to handle their respective parts, and then you do a maintenance of any infrastructure or whatnot. A whole army of ops org basically are in the war room fighting fires. Sysadmins, DBAs, network engineers, storage admins, ops center, QAs, PMs, basically everybody. And mostly it's larger than your expected downtime. There are increased frustration. There's a tons of overtime pay, and there is a less than favorable work-life balance, right? So that brings me to the next problem, the siloed teams. So basically, the app that gets built by a developer is completely different than what runs in production. What I mean by is that dev world and ops world are completely isolated world, right? Once the developer gives you an application to run, the ops org basically massages it, adds some configuration, and add some environment settings. They have the custom deployment tools. and they have their own high availability sort of setup or whatnot. So basically, if you have to troubleshoot the app that is written by developer, I think only the ops guy can do that, because they are kind of aware of that. Ops have design checks. They have the different UIs. They have the different policies to monitor, scale, or view performance of those apps. Right? Again, dev has no window into it. That brings me to the next problem. That is the ops rigidity. Again, what I was saying is that once the dev hand off their app and ops are basically running it, dev have no window into it, and they have no idea what happens to their app in production. Devs are completely agnostic. There is no feedback mechanism from ops to dev. That ends up having poorly written apps. Since the developer don't know how their apps behave or run in production, there's no feedback. They just like write crap, and ops basically fight fires and basically do some I don't know, some hacks or whatnot to basically just run it in production. Again, running apps shouldn't be an ops forte. The reason why I tell you is that because dev know more about their apps. So because right now we do not have any infrastructure or any piece that basically helps you do that. So what we should be doing is that we should basically help dev to run and manage their apps. Ops should focus on securing and managing the underlying infrastructure and system. That's what they should be doing more, rather than running their apps. Again, we should basically empower dev. We shouldn't handicap them. So these are some of the problems, right, which we typically face, and some of us can relate to it. I can relate to it very well, because I've been basically in this field for almost like so many years now, and I've been there, done that, and when I pulled my hairs, and but no more. So how to make ops as a profit center? Answer is DevOps. I know what you're thinking. It is such a cliche and a management buzzword. Everybody is basically talking about DevOps, but there is no concrete plan. DevOps is like a hip thing, and everybody wants to talk about it. But there is, if you talk about DevOps, how do you go about it? It's a long road, right? There is no nobody will tell you, okay, do this way, and then you will actually achieve your destination or whatnot. There are lots of theories floating around and best practices how to go about it, and none of those best practices can lead you immediate result. So these are some of like the DevOps common theories that we actually hear a lot. If we say, okay, if we can have dev and ops collaborate more, it's a DevOps. Maybe somebody will say, okay, running infrastructure as a code is a DevOps. What it actually means is that you can actually write the scripts to basically provision your environment, your VMs, and then you deploy your code. It basically runs there. So it's basically part of it's part of like a code. So basically provisioning your infrastructure is a code. So there's another theory about that. And some of will say, okay, if you use like more and more automation, and if we educate people more, ops with the dev world and dev with the ops world, that's how you do DevOps. And some CEOs, C-suite bosses will say, okay, changing culture is a DevOps, right? And some of them will say, okay, if you can make the entire process like more agile, if you use Kanban or Sprint or for ops work, that's basically more stand-up-y sort of way, so that's a DevOps. And some of us will say, okay, if you use tools like Jenkins, Puppet, Chef, Vagrant, Docker, etcd, Zookeeper, that's kind of tools to write or use our apps, that's DevOps. That's fine. This is all basically theories, right? So if you basically ask me, how does DevOps look in practice? I would say, you would like to know tell me, I mean, instead of all the theories, give me like which tools or suite of tools that I can basically use that would encompass all, maybe if not all, some of the, most of it, DevOps best practices. And answer is Mesos. I will show you how with respect to the problems that we actually discussed. Okay, so let's say this is basically like the same thing that I spoke about earlier. We have static partitioning, we have these resources. For example, for the product one, I statically provision this many hosts. For product two, I have this many hosts, and my products are basically running over there, right? But in the world of Mesos, it isn't like that. So what Mesos does is that in Mesos, all the hosts, they advertise their resources, and Mesos is basically a scheduler. It basically know which host has how many resources, how many everything, so that once he actually gets a job to run, it basically provides a provision that job to run like on any of those nodes. And to run the jobs, there are various frameworks on top of Mesos, something like for running apps, for running something for running message queues, something for build pipeline, map reduce jobs. So you can basically technically run anything that you want as a framework on top of Mesos, what you have been doing in your traditional world. So for example, in this case, Mesos get a job to run some build pipeline job, right? So depending upon the resources that are available there, it basically provisions them onto those machines, and they basically happily run over there. So you are not now statically provisioning any of your node for any given product or app. It just basically runs. And how does Mesos solve this issue that I spoke about, static provisioning of people? Right, we have this big hierarchy, like we have SAs, basically all the other admins. So instead of just like limiting themselves to just being an expert only for that particular field, I would basically encourage those guys to do something more. For example, sysadmin, I think they should focus more on making this underlying infrastructure of Mesos cluster. How do you make it more secure? How can you run more and more containers or like jobs onto this many hosts? So that's how they should basically think in those along those lines, rather than just like rebooting the machines or just like doing normal SA duties. How do I make the entire underlying infrastructure cluster, make it more highly available, scalable, and fault tolerant? How do I manage the environment? Basically, that should what SAs should do if you actually want to get away from and truly make into a DevOpsy sort of environment. And storage admins should basically talk more about how do my customers can do self-serve storage. How can I provide some DFS or NFS solutions that they can leverage basically. And for the SREs that are managing the apps in production, they should think more about how can I basically make those apps that are running in production more visible to the developers. How do I provide a automated service discovery solutions basically, so that once you spin something up on this cluster, you get automated service discovery on the fly. And for the DBAs, I think they should think more along like how do I provide a persistent storage for running some of this stuff. For example, for running some databases, maybe like using some block devices, either through some proprietary stuff like EMCs or SAF or whatnot, right? And if you're a networking guy, I think they should look more into how can I provide more like a layer 3 virtual networking, or maybe if overlay network is your thing, maybe do that. And maybe something like that provides the IPs, automated IPs to the containers when you spin up the containers. So in addition to the typical jobs, I think we need to basically broaden up their mindset to provide this sort of solutions so that which everybody can benefit. And with that thing, the developers will be more ops aware how the stuff is running in production. They would write better apps that would perform in production, and they would be able to auto scale depending upon the need. For example, if you get more traffic or whatnot, they should be able to scale their apps up dynamically on the fly without talking to the ops folk. Okay, I want 10 instances, 100 instances, whatnot. They should be able to do that automatically by themselves, right? And again, the third problem that I spoke about was like a maintenance window. When you basically when one of your node goes down, right? You basically have tons of notifications sent out. Whole army of ops and dev are huddled up. The traffic is shifted. Apps are bounced. There's a big revenue loss and a whole lot of passing the bug and post-mortem analysis. That's what basically happens in your current environment. But in the Mesos world, what basically happens? If your node goes down, doesn't matter. Mesos knows about the resources available there. It's going to spin up your job somewhere else, and it's going to automatically update your load balancers and whatnot, so that they just go to the right nodes where they're actually serving now. So there is no maintenance window at all in this world, and there is no ops rigidity, because in the world of Mesos, everything gets opened up. There is no ops world. For example, if you want to run apps or API servers or whatnot, use Marathon to see what is running in production to scale. And if you're running some batch jobs or cron jobs, use Kronos framework. And if you want to run some message queues, for example, if you want to run some CI/CD, use Jenkins on Mesos as a framework. If you are running Kafka, just scale your Kafka through brokers, basically on top of Mesos. Mesos will basically account for what's available out there. What I'm trying to say here is that now there shouldn't be an admin to go to do anything at all. You just have to know how to use these tools, and you should be able to spin up your jobs, spin up your CI/CD. You should be able to spin up your brokers and whatnot. And if you want to basically view the logs from all these containers or whatnot, employ some sort of a elk stack to view your logs in real time. And if you want to do some performance metrics for your containers or whatnot, then deploy some solutions. We have quite a few vendors here. Talk to them. But there won't. What you will get is that you won't get like any ops rigidity in the end. Everything will be open for everybody to view and benefit and contribute basically. And there is no vested capacity in this. Right, with Mesos, there is no vested capacity. You can technically run hundreds, or maybe not hundreds, maybe tens on a tens of containers on a single machine. And to isolate every app, containerize them. With containers, you will be able to rate limit or meter the CPU usage, your memory, your disk I/O, network bandwidth utilization, disk usage of all the respective containers that are running on that machine. So Docker and Mesos basically they give you some of these features like by hand. I mean by default, or maybe if not, then just like incorporate that. And if you do this thing, there won't be any siloed teams anymore. Now that everybody is using the same infrastructure and they're using the same processes, there is no siloed teams. Ops and dev, they also convert their existing app to run on this unified cluster. There is no ops world or dev world, or basically if ops basically have some programs or some tools, just containerize them and run on this cluster. So everybody is basically going to the same pipeline. Everybody knows how to submit the jobs, run it, and then how to get notified and everything basically. Similarly with for everyone. Again, they get a unified system to view or manage their apps for logging, for metrics, for service discovery. They will know how to use your config store, how to pull the configs for your apps in real time, and the same security model for securing their apps, and the same isolation techniques for multi-tenant apps running on the same machine. So that's that. So with the help of Mesos, we can achieve all of this. Now, my next thing. So now you basically saw the overview of some of the stuff, and you would like to know how can you benefit from this. So does Mesos provide all these things out of the box? No. Mesos is just like a scheduler. It just takes some job, and it basically spins up onto the resources available there. So what do? I talk about all those like all those features. How would I go about it? How can I get that? To start with, you can use something like Mesosphere DCOS, which will help you jumpstart. But they don't have all of those things that I spoke about. So, or if you have a heterogeneous environment, say like us, then wherein you are running all kinds of app on the same cluster, then you basically devise your solutions in-house. So that's basically what we have done. All those things. So we are running this stuff with the heterogeneous workload, about 60 different products on a unified cluster for almost like a year now. And initially there were some bumps, but we have stabilized the cluster so much now. So basically you can say there's like high availability, and there is no more waking up your ops guy in the middle of the night to troubleshoot any issues. They just handle those things during the off hours. Nothing is emergency, nothing is impending right away. Everything Mesos take care of it. Right? So what are we doing at YP Engineering? So basically our engineering team has Duncan like DevOps Kool-Aid. In the beginning, it tastes like Dr. Pepper. It tastes like kind of weird, but trust me, the taste grows on you quickly, and then you get used to it. And we are building, running, and managing this elastic compute technologies at scale. So we are doing all this crazy stuff that you saw earlier. We are doing centralized logging, metrics, application secrets, config stores, service discovery, persistent storage to run your databases in the containers on the Mesos, and we are doing some real-time analytics. We are running message brokers. We are running CI/CD pipeline, whole bunch of stuff basically on this cluster. We have basically moved away from managing any independent stuff that we used to basically run on. So now everything is basically converted to run onto this cluster. Everything has been Dockerized. We are running everything as a container in production. So all those ops apps or whatnot has been containerized, and even all the dev apps, most of it we have containerized them, and then we are running on this cluster. And again, as I said, like we have been running this DevOps infrastructure for almost like a year now. It's fairly stable. We don't get paid, and just things just basically works. So that basically, remember I was talking to you earlier that we don't 70-80% of your time is basically spent on managing the existing stuff, but now we have more free time now. The people in the ops world, we have more free time. So now we can sit down and we can improvise on the solutions, like how can we improve the new stuff, and then we have more leverage on our end. So that's basically what got us without asking for any new budget or anything like that. It's with the same amount of people, with the smart guys that my basically team has. We are able to basically improvise on all those like ops issues, and we are able to benefit from that. And again, some of the stuff that I basically mentioned over here, we have made some of them open source. So feel free to check them out on YP Engineering GitHub page. And some of the solutions that we have basically developed are basically being recommended. For example, our block device solution is being recommended by Ceph as a highly recommended if you want to use block device on Mesos with containers. So that's what, just feel free to check them out. And what is the future ahead? Again, the thing that we saw, it could be, we saw can be intimidating, right? Because we are talking about completely changing the way how our ops or dev are basically doing the daily work. It's not easy. It takes a right kind of people and right kind of motivation. And you need a strong leadership team to basically drive them in that direction. So it's basically a combination of both, of all actually. After all, we are talking about changing things we have been doing all these years. But trust me, this is the future. Data center operating system is big, is getting big, and it's going to be more bigger in future. Containers are big, it's going to go more bigger down the line. And isolation to run multiple apps on a single machine is big. It's going to grow more. And DevOps is big. Again, it's going to grow more. So this is the future basically. And if we can do that, we can proudly say our ops will no longer be a cost center. We can actually make it into a profit center. we actually will be able to provide a value to our other departments, other engineering teams, that we actually augment you. We basically help you in doing your daily job. We are running solid apps, and that's how we can actually get to that. Here are some of the stuff that I basically mentioned in my talk today. My slide is basically posted on my schedule page, so feel free to pull that up. And I guess, yeah, that's about it. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening. I think we have some time left, so if any questions, yeah. Sure.
So you mentioned running databases with persistent storage. What type of solution did you guys use for that?
So basically, to running persistent storage, we actually employed like Ceph as a distributed file system. So we are actually using a Rados block device solution, and then we actually have written our own Docker volume driver plugin that actually creates a block device from Ceph and actually mounts them inside the container, so your apps can actually use it. But the thing is that in the container world, everything is ephemeral, right? Your container is basically running on this machine, and then your block device is basically mounted there, but your container can be easily dead and then can spin up somewhere else. So our volume driver plugin is basically sort of smart enough to basically say, okay, this is for this app, I'm going to unlock from this node, I'm going to mount somewhere else. So I think you can achieve persistence with that way. So feel free to check them out. If you go to Ceph site and look for block device, our solution is basically mentioned over there, and there's a link to basically which takes you to a GitHub page. You can download that and then use and can use it with your Docker containers. All right. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks for listening.